Along Route 60, the mountains crowd so close that a driver can lose the sky, the radio, and every sign of another human being within the same mile. Some who traveled it after dark returned with stories about voices on dead channels, passengers they never picked up, and roads that should no longer exist. These are 9 of their most disturbing accounts. Daniel Mercer began every delivery day by checking the weather twice. The first forecast came from the small radio on his kitchen windowsill. The second came from Claire, who stood at the counter with a coffee mug in both hands and looked toward the clouds beyond their backyard. "Rain on the mountain," she said that Monday. Daniel glanced through the glass. The maple tree behind the shed was barely moving. "Not down here. It is never down here." Claire packed 2 roast beef sandwiches into his lunch bag. She added a folded paper towel between them, so the bread would not get damp from the cold pack. She had done that since their daughter was small, and Daniel had stopped pretending he did not notice. He left before 7. At the end of the driveway, he waved until Claire turned back toward the house. Daniel delivered medicine to independent pharmacies and rural clinics across southern West Virginia. His route changed each day, but the mountain portion was usually the same. He took Route 60 through the narrow towns, crossed above the Kanawha River, and climbed toward Sewell Mountain with gray plastic crates secured behind him. The company van had 2 seats in front and a bench seat in the rear. Nobody ever rode on the bench. Daniel kept his rain jacket there, along with an old road atlas and a cardboard box filled with invoices. He liked the work because it gave his days a shape. Every pharmacy had its own smell. Every clerk had a preferred place for signatures. At one clinic, the receptionist kept peppermint candy beneath the counter. At another, an elderly pharmacist named Vernon refused to use the electronic scanner unless Daniel was standing beside him. "If that green light turns red, you are fixing it," Vernon always said. That Monday, the light stayed green. Daniel ate his first sandwich in a parking lot near Gauley Bridge. He listened to a voice message from his daughter Mara, who was away at college. She needed him to photograph the serial number on the washing machine at home. She could not remember why. He played the message twice, then he sent back, "Your mother says you called us old last week, so we are not helping," Mara answered with a laughing face before he pulled onto the road. Rain began after 3 in the afternoon. It arrived as a faint tapping on the roof, too light for the wipers. By the time Daniel made his final delivery, water was running across the pavement in silver threads. He called Claire from beneath the pharmacy awning. "I am heading back. Take the river road if the fog comes down. It adds 40 minutes. It also adds 40 minutes to your life." He promised to be careful. That was their usual exchange. The climb toward Sewell Mountain began beneath a low ceiling of cloud. Daniel turned the radio down so he could hear the tires. Rain changed the road's voice on dry pavement. The van made a steady hum. On wet pavement, the sound became rougher near standing water and nearly vanished where loose gravel had washed across the lane. Daniel knew those differences. Halfway up the mountain, the fog reached the road. His headlights reflected from it and formed a pale wall ahead of the hood. The trees appeared only when he was beside them. Their wet branches leaned over the shoulder. There were no other headlights. Daniel passed an old turnout bordered by a rusted guardrail. The turnout had once overlooked the valley, but trees had grown across the view. He had stopped there years earlier to change a tire. He remembered beer cans under the leaves and a child's red mitten caught in the fence. A sound came from behind him. It was a clean metallic click. Daniel looked into the mirror. The bench seat was empty. His rain jacket lay where he had left it, and the cardboard invoice box rested against the door. He kept driving. A few seconds later, the rear seat belt retractor made a short dragging sound. Webbing moved through its slot, then stopped. Daniel turned on the ceiling light. The road atlas was flat on the seat. Nothing had fallen. Nothing was touching the belt. The fog thinned near the bottom of the descent. When he reached the warehouse, he parked beneath the loading lights and opened the sliding door. The belt behind the passenger seat had been fastened. Daniel pressed the red release button. The metal tongue came free and snapped against the plastic wall. He stood there for a moment, listening to the rain strike the van's roof. Then he checked the other belts. They worked normally. He pulled the one that had latched and let it retract several times. It did not catch. A crate must have shifted earlier, he decided. Perhaps he had fastened the belt without remembering. The explanation did not fit the sound, but it was close enough to carry home. On Tuesday morning, Daniel found the washing machine serial number for Mara. He wrote it on his wrist, because his phone was upstairs. Claire noticed the ink while filling his travel mug. New tattoo. Your daughter has turned me into office equipment. The sky was clear above their house. Daniel left his rain jacket on the rear bench anyway. At the warehouse, Sherry Collins assigned him the same mountain route. She had worked dispatch for 12 years and could estimate travel time by looking at the color of the clouds. Rock crews are near Lookout, she said. Do not let them trap you on the wrong side. Daniel loaded the crates. Before closing the van, he checked the rear belt. It was hanging loose. The day remained ordinary. Vernon argued with the scanner. Daniel bought coffee at a gas station where the cashier was taping a handwritten sign over the lottery display. A dog slept beside the ice machine with one ear raised. Around noon, clouds collected over the ridges. By late afternoon, rain covered the windshield again. Daniel considered taking the longer route home. Then dispatch called a clinic had reported one missing package, and Sherry needed him back before the evening inventory. He turned toward Sewell Mountain. The rain was heavier than the night before. It drummed on the roof and filled the drainage ditches. Small stones ticked beneath the van. Daniel passed two cars heading the opposite way, then saw no one for several miles. He lowered his speed before the old turnout. The metallic click came at the same point. Daniel's right foot lifted from the accelerator. The van rolled forward under its own weight. He did not look into the mirror immediately. He listened. The rear belt retractor moved in small pulls. Each pull lasted less than a second. The pauses between them were regular pull, stop, pull, stop. Then the webbing held. Daniel looked. The belt was fastened across the empty bench. His rain jacket had been pushed toward the center. Beside it, the seat cushion held a shallow depression. He reached for the ceiling light. His fingers missed the switch twice. The light came on. The depression remained. Daniel drove until he found a wide shoulder near a closed produce stand. He stopped beneath its faded green roof and left the engine running. When he opened the side door, the belt was still latched. Water shone on the metal tongue. Though the bench and the jacket were dry, he touched the buckle. It was warm. Daniel released it and stepped back. The webbing returned slowly, making a soft clicking sound inside the pillar. A pickup passed without slowing. Its tires threw water across the shoulder. Daniel closed the door and stood beside the van until its taillights disappeared. At the warehouse, Sherry watched him unload the empty crates. You leave somebody up the mountain? Daniel put one crate inside another. What, you keep checking your back seat? He told her the buckle was defective. He made the problem sound small. Sherry stopped writing on her clipboard. My brother used to drive that road at night, she said. He buckled every empty seat before he left. Why, he never said. She moved to the next van. Daniel slept poorly. Whenever the house settled, he heard the belt retracting in the wall behind his head. Claire woke once and asked if he had left the television on. He told her it was the rain. The next morning, he took the van to the company mechanic. Leon pulled the belt hard, twisted it, struck the buckle with his palm, and tested the release spring. It cannot fasten itself, Leon said. It did twice. Leon looked through the windshield toward the loading yard. Then somebody fastened it. Daniel removed his rain jacket, the atlas, and the invoice box from the bench. He cleaned the upholstery with a shop vacuum. Before leaving, he folded the belt behind the seat and wedged it there so the metal tongue could not reach the buckle. Rain started shortly before sunset. Daniel's final stop was a pharmacy west of the mountain. He finished late because their delivery records did not match. By the time he returned to the van, the neighboring stores were dark. Claire called as he pulled out. Come home by the river. Daniel looked at the time on the dashboard. The river route would keep him out well past dinner. He heard himself say, I will at the first junction. A road crew had placed orange barriers across the turn. A rock slide had closed one lane farther down. The detour sign pointed toward Route 60. Daniel sat behind the barrier with the wipers moving. Then a truck pulled up behind him and flashed its lights. He took the detour. Fog covered the mountain from the lower curve onward. Daniel turned off the radio. He wanted to hear the belt before it happened. The van climbed through rain and white light. Water ran from the trees in steady streams. The road beyond the headlights did not seem to arrive until the tires touched it. Daniel approached the old turnout. First, he heard fabric move across the bench. Then came a slow breath. It was close enough to cloud the glass behind his shoulder. Daniel kept both hands on the wheel. His eyes stayed on the road. The belt tongue scraped against plastic. It had worked free from behind the seat. The metal piece dragged downward. 1 inch at a time, Daniel saw it in the mirror. The empty belt rose from the pillar and extended across the bench. The cushion lowered beneath it, not all at once. The fabric compressed as if weight were settling carefully into place. The buckle clicked. Daniel passed the turnout. A voice behind him said, "Not here." It was quiet. The words carried no strain and no urgency. They sounded like directions given by someone who had traveled the road many times. Daniel's hands tightened around the wheel. His wedding ring pressed into the skin beside his knuckle. The voice did not speak again. The depression remained in the seat. The shoulder strap rested several inches above the cushion, held away from it by a shape the mirror could not show. Daniel continued down the mountain. At every side road, he waited for another instruction. None came. Near the bottom, the fog opened around a narrow gravel lane he had never noticed before. There was no road sign. 2 stone posts stood among the weeds, and beyond them the lane descended between the trees. The rear buckle released. The sliding door handle lifted. Cold air entered around the rubber seal. It carried the smell of wet wool and wood smoke. Daniel stopped for several seconds. Only the rain moved. Then the side door rolled open less than a foot. Gravel shifted outside. One careful step followed another, descending the lane where his headlights could not reach. The seat cushion slowly rose. Daniel closed the door from inside and drove home without stopping. He never found that gravel lane again. He looked for the stone posts in daylight, but the mountain offered only guardrail, drainage ditch, and trees. Daniel left the delivery job before winter. Years later, he still refused to drive across Sewell Mountain after rain. Whenever he entered any car, even for a short trip, he reached into the empty back seat before starting the engine. Mountain roads allow every traveler a small circle of light while keeping the rest of the journey to themselves. Daniel learned to accept that division, but he never again left an empty seatbelt unfastened. Lena Ortiz began her night shifts by replacing whatever her day crew had taken from the ambulance and forgotten to record. Usually it was gauze. Sometimes it was saline tape or the small packets of lubricant nobody admitted to losing. That Wednesday evening, she found 3 empty compartments and a half-eaten package of cheese crackers beneath the driver's seat. She held it up for her partner, Owen Rusk. "Evidence. Not mine," he said. "You are the only person here who eats these." That proves nothing. Owen was 53 and had worked mountain ambulance routes for most of his adult life. He brought the same dented thermos every night and kept a paper map folded inside his jacket. Though every ambulance had navigation, Lena had been his partner for 14 months. She knew he whistled when checking oxygen tanks. She knew he became very quiet when a call involved a child. She also knew he would finish the cheese crackers before midnight. Their ambulance station sat behind a volunteer fire department outside Raynell. The building had 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with 1-level cabinet, and a television that turned green whenever the heater started. Before shift change, Lena called her younger sister Elena. Lena had promised to order a birthday cake for their mother, but she had forgotten which bakery made the icing their mother liked. "The place beside the laundromat," Elena said. "There are 3 laundromats. The one with the broken letter." Lena wrote it on the back of a glove wrapper and placed it beside the radio. By morning, she would lose the note and remember the conversation perfectly. Their first call came before 8. An elderly man had fallen beside his bathtub and could not stand. He refused transport after Owen helped him into bed. His wife made them take 2 jars of canned beans before they left. The second call came from a house where a teenager had mistaken a panic attack for a heart problem. Lena sat with the girl on the front porch until her breathing slowed. Rain tapped the metal awning above them. At 11, they returned to the station. Owen heated soup while Lena entered reports. The television changed from green to purple, then shut off. The dispatch radio sounded at 11:26. A woman named Norrin Pike needed transport from a small clinic near Rennell to the hospital in Lewisburg. She had fallen on her porch and injured her hip. Her condition was stable, but the clinic did not have imaging equipment. Noreen was 76 and wore a blue nightgown beneath her coat. She kept apologizing for the mud on her slippers. "My son was supposed to fix that step," she said. Owen adjusted the stretcher straps. "Then we will send him the cleaning bill." Noreen laughed once. The movement hurt, so she pressed her lips together and watched the ceiling during the rest of the ride. The rain strengthened as they traveled east. Lena sat in the rear and checked Noreen's blood pressure, twice from the front. Owen called out the sharper curves before the ambulance entered them. They reached the hospital shortly after midnight. Norensen was waiting near the entrance in work boots and pajama pants. He took his mother's hand before the emergency department doors closed. Lena and Owen cleaned the stretcher, replaced the sheet, and began the return trip. Route 60 was almost empty. Rainwater shone across the blacktop. The ambulance headlights caught bare rock on one side and wet guardrail on the other. Beyond the rail, the ground dropped toward a creek hidden by trees. Owen turned the radio low. A country song faded beneath the sound of the tires. They were several miles outside town when Lena heard another engine. It stayed behind them without gaining. Its pitch rose on the hills and softened on the descents. Lena looked through the side mirror, but rain covered the glass. A pair of headlights appeared after the next curve. The vehicle remained about 6 car lengths back. It was a dark 4-door sedan with one headlight slightly higher than the other. Owen moved closer to the shoulder. The sedan did not pass. He reduced the ambulance speed. The space between them remained the same. Then he accelerated. The headlights stayed where they were. Lena cleaned the mirror with her sleeve and looked again. The front windshield of the sedan reflected the ambulance lights. She could not see the driver. "Maybe he likes the view," Owen said. Lena watched the sedan for another mile. Its tires never touched the center line. Its headlights never moved closer. They passed a closed grocery store, a church, and 2 houses with dark windows. Near the edge of another small town, a young woman stood beneath the awning of a laundromat. One letter was missing from its sign. Lena noticed that first. The woman wore a restaurant uniform and held a phone above her head, searching for a signal. A white plastic bag sat at her feet. "Slow down," Lena said. Owen eased off the accelerator. The woman looked toward the ambulance and raised one hand. Owen switched on the right turn signal. Behind them, the sedan's headlights disappeared. Lena turned in her seat. There was no side road. There was only a narrow gravel entrance to the laundromat parking lot. "Keep going." Owen glanced at her. "Just another 100 feet. They continued past the building. In the mirror, the sedan rolled into the parking lot without signaling. Its lights remained off. Owen turned the ambulance around at the next intersection. When they returned, the woman was climbing into a pickup truck. A second woman leaned over to open the passenger door for her. The dark sedan was gone. Lena lowered her window. "You all right?" The woman nodded and pointed to the pickup. My sister Owen drove on. Lena did not see the sedan. The road still. Less than 10 minutes later, the uneven headlights appeared behind them again. This time they were closer. The dispatch radio crackled. A deputy was asking for information about a domestic disturbance. Another unit answered from the western end of the county. Lena picked up the microphone. "Dispatch, can you run a description for us?" The reply broke apart under static. She repeated the request when they reached higher ground. "Dark sedan, no visible front plate, following eastbound ambulance on Route 60. The dispatcher asked for the rear plate. Lena angled the side mirror. The sedan's front end filled it. "We have not seen the rear." Owen slowed near a wide driveway. The sedan slowed with him. When the ambulance stopped, the sedan stopped in the traffic lane. Rain crossed both sets of headlights. Owen waited. The sedan waited. A truck appeared around the curve behind it. The sedan moved forward, past the ambulance, and continued east. Lena leaned toward the windshield as it went by. The side windows were tinted. The rear plate holder was empty. The sedan disappeared around the next curve. "Now dispatch has a direction," Owen said. His left hand remained at the top of the steering wheel. The skin over his knuckles had gone pale. They gave the description again. The nearest deputy was 20 minutes away. Owen resumed driving. For a while they saw nothing except wet pavement. Then they passed a house with a porch light burning. A man in a bathrobe stood beside the mailbox with a small dog. The ordinary sight loosened Lena's shoulders. 2 miles later, hazard lights blinked ahead. A minivan was parked partly in the eastbound lane. A woman stood behind it, waving a flashlight. Her front passenger tire had collapsed, and the wheel rested against the pavement. Owen activated the ambulance warning lights and stopped several yards behind her. Lena stepped out. Rain entered the collar of her jacket. The woman was named Carol Weller. She had left work at a nursing home and was driving home to Rupert. Her phone showed no service. "Someone already stopped," Carol said. "He wanted me to sit in his car." "What kind of car?" Carol pointed west. "Black, maybe dark blue." Lena looked toward the curve behind the ambulance. The road was empty. "Did you see the driver?" "Baseball cap, dark jacket." Carol had refused the ride. The man had remained beside her minivan until the ambulance lights appeared through the trees. Then he returned to his car and drove away without turning on his headlights. Owen called dispatch. Lena guided Carol into the rear compartment where it was warm. They could not safely change the tire in the traffic lane. A tow truck was coming, but it would take nearly an hour. Owen decided to transport Carol to a gas station several miles ahead, where her husband could meet her. Carol sat on the side bench and held her wet flashlight between both hands. They had driven less than a mile when Lena heard the engine again. It came from behind the ambulance, low and steady. The sedan had no headlights. Its shape appeared only when the ambulance warning lights swept across the hood. It followed so closely that Lena could see rain flowing over its windshield. Owen increased speed. The sedan remained there. Lena radioed dispatch, but the mountain blocked most of her words. She caught fragments of the response. A deputy was approaching from Raynell. They needed to continue east. The road narrowed before a bridge. Concrete walls replaced the shoulder, leaving no room to stop. Halfway across, the sedan moved into the opposite lane. Its engine grew louder beside Lena's door. The driver matched the ambulance speed, holding the front window level with hers. The glass was dark. Behind it, a man's pale hand rested on the steering wheel. He wore a black glove with the fingertips removed. A truck rounded the curve ahead. The sedan dropped back before the truck reached the bridge. Its tires sprayed water against the ambulance doors. Owen said nothing. He drove faster. The gas station appeared beyond a long bend. Its sign was lit, but the building was closed. Carol's husband had not arrived. Owen pulled beneath the canopy and positioned the ambulance beside the pumps. Bright lights covered the lot. The sedan did not follow them in. Lena called dispatch from the station's landline emergency box. This time the connection was clear. The deputy was 7 minutes away. Carol stayed inside the ambulance. Owen stood near the front bumper watching the road. For several minutes no vehicles passed. Then Lena heard shoes scrape across gravel behind the station. Owen heard them too. He stepped beneath the canopy. A dark figure moved between the trash enclosure and the rear of the ambulance. The man wore a baseball cap and a short jacket with reflective strips across the shoulders. From a distance it resembled emergency clothing. He reached the ambulance doors and tested the handle. Carol struck the inside wall with her flashlight. Lena activated the siren. The sound filled the empty station. The man stepped away from the doors and covered one ear. For an instant, the canopy lights showed his face. He had a narrow gray mustache and rain running from the bill of his cap. Then he ran behind the building. Owen drove around the station while Lena kept the siren on. They found tire marks in the gravel and an empty road beyond them. The deputy arrived 4 minutes later. Carol's husband came soon after. Officers searched both directions but never located the sedan. The description matched no registered vehicle in the immediate area. Rain erased the tire marks before sunrise. 3 weeks later, a road maintenance worker found a magnetic medical transport sign in a drainage ditch near Route 60. It had no company name. The reflective stripes matched the jacket Lena had seen beneath the gas station lights. No one connected it to a driver. Lena continued working nights, but she changed the way she watched the road. She noticed closed businesses where women waited after shifts. She noticed disabled cars, empty plate holders, and headlights that remained the same distance away. People who drive mountain roads after midnight learn to identify vehicles by their lights. Lena learned to pay closer attention to the space where a license plate should have been. Even now, she keeps a folded silver blanket behind her own passenger seat, and whenever she sees a woman alone beside Route 60, she turns around before the next curve can hide her. Curtis Hale woke at 2:40 every morning without an alarm. He usually remained in bed for another minute, listening to the house. The refrigerator made a low rattle in the kitchen. Water moved through the baseboard pipes. In the room across the hall, his grandson Noah sometimes talked in his sleep. Curtis's daughter Beth had moved home after her divorce. She worked mornings at a dental office and left Noah with Curtis until the school bus arrived. On driving days, Curtis woke Beth before he left. On Saturdays, he let her sleep. That morning, he found a paper bag on the kitchen table. Noah had drawn a red coal truck on the front. The truck had 12 wheels on one side and flames coming from both exhaust pipes. Inside were 2 ham biscuits and a note. "Do not trade these for gas station food." Curtis folded the drawing and placed it in his shirt pocket. He ate 1 biscuit while standing at the sink. The second went into his lunchbox beside a thermos of black coffee and an apple he would probably bring home untouched. His truck was parked at a hauling yard west of Raynell. It was a red Kenworth with nearly 800,000 miles on the frame. The driver's seat leaned slightly to the right, and the heater only worked when the fan knob was set between the marked positions. Curtis knew every complaint the truck could make. A light rattle beneath the floor meant a loose heat shield. A fast ticking near the left window came from the mirror bracket. A dull knock during a steep climb meant he had shifted too early. That knowledge had kept him alive for 27 years. He inspected the tires with a metal bar, checked the air lines, and drained moisture from the tanks. Then he climbed into the cab and switched on the company radio. The radio had 8 channels. Dispatch used channel 1. Drivers used channel 2 when loading and channel 3 near the scales. The remaining channels produced only static. Curtis tested the microphone. "Truck 14, radio check." Loretta Vance answered from dispatch, "Clear enough to hear you chewing." Curtis swallowed the last bite of biscuit. "Truck 14 heading to the mine. Watch the west entrance. Grader is working near the gate." Curtis placed the microphone on its hook and pulled into the dark. His route carried him from the mine to a transfer yard near the river. The loaded portion followed Route 60 through a series of long grades and narrow curves. He made 3 trips on a good day. Bad weather could reduce that to 2. The first trip passed without delay. The sky brightened behind the ridges, though sunlight did not reach the road. Curtis delivered his load, swept loose coal from the trailer frame, and stopped at a diner for coffee. Wes Calder sat at the counter wearing a reflective jacket. He drove the same route for another company and had known Curtis since both men still had dark hair. "You still carrying that paper map?" Wes asked. Curtis tapped his jacket pocket. "That map does not lose signal. It also thinks half the bridges are wooden." Curtis drank his coffee and left $1 beneath the cup. By the second trip, rain had begun. It was light at first. The drops made brief dark circles in the coal dust on the hood. Curtis loaded shortly before noon and started west with 40 tons behind him. The truck moved slowly on the climbs. On the descents, he let the engine hold the weight rather than pressing the brakes. Near the top of Sewell Mountain, the radio cracked. Curtis glanced at the display. It had changed from channel 2 to channel 7. A man's voice came through the speaker. It was thin beneath the static, but the words were clear. "Westbound, hold before Ransom's, car across both lanes." Curtis reached for the microphone. "Say again." "Where is Ransom's?" The speaker released a burst of static. Then the man repeated the warning. "Hold before Ransom's, car across both lanes." Curtis reduced speed. He did not know any place called Ransom's. The navigation screen showed no accident ahead, and dispatch had reported nothing. A mile later, he entered a curve beside an abandoned service station. The building had no sign. Plywood covered its windows, and weeds grew through the broken pavement. Beyond it, a silver car sat sideways across the highway. The driver had lost control on the wet curve and struck the guardrail. The car blocked both lanes. A woman stood beside it, holding a child beneath her coat. Curtis stopped with plenty of room. He activated his hazard lights and radioed dispatch on channel 1. Loretta contacted emergency services. Curtis remained in the cab until a deputy arrived, using his trailer to shield the disabled car from traffic coming down the mountain. The woman and child were uninjured. When the road reopened, Curtis looked at the abandoned station as he passed. Faded paint showed through the plywood above the door. He could make out only the final letters SON. At the transfer yard, he checked the radio. The selector knob was still set to channel 2, though the display had shown 7. He mentioned it to the yard mechanic. "Loose wire," the mechanic said. "That wire knew about a wreck. Then give it my job." The mechanic removed the radio, checked the connections, and returned it to the dashboard. He found no damage. Curtis made no third trip that day. Rain had slowed loading, so he parked the truck before dark and drove home. Noah met him at the door. "You kept my truck." Curtis removed the folded drawing from his pocket. Coal dust had darkened the edges. "Mine does not have flames. Yours is slower." Beth covered a laugh with her hand. The following morning was dry. Curtis heard nothing unusual during his first run. Channel 7 remained silent, even when he selected it deliberately. Only static came through the speaker. On his second trip, he was descending toward the river when the radio display changed again. The speaker clicked before the voice returned. "Eastbound. Take care below Miller's Feed. Stone in the right lane." Curtis was traveling west. He answered anyway. "What truck are you driving?" No response came. "Driver, what is your unit number?" Static filled the cab. Curtis passed a cluster of houses and an empty lot where a concrete foundation remained beside the road. Half a mile farther, several stones lay across the eastbound lane. One was large enough to break an axle. Curtis warned an approaching truck over the normal channel. The other driver slowed before reaching them. At the transfer yard, Curtis found Wes securing a tarp over his trailer. "You ever hear of Miller's Feed?" Wes stopped pulling the strap. "My dad bought chicken grain there." "Where was it?" "Back near the old school. Building came down before I started driving." "What about Ransom's?" "That was a gas station." Wes studied Curtis through the gap between their trucks. "Who have you been talking to?" Curtis told him about Channel 7. Wes finished tightening the strap before answering. "The old independent drivers used that channel. That was before the company radios." "How long ago?" Long enough's climbed into his cab before closing the door. He added one sentence. "If he gives you a landmark, make sure you know which road he means." That evening, Curtis searched through the paper map in his jacket. It had belonged to his father and showed an older alignment of Route 60 in faint red ink. Several modern curves had not existed when the map was printed. Near Sewell Mountain, the red line left the current highway and descended toward the river. Curtis had seen pieces of that abandoned grade through the trees. Most of it had been closed when the road was widened. Someone had written Ransom's in pencil beside the old line. The next 3 days passed without another transmission. Curtis kept the radio on Channel 2 and watched the display. Nothing changed. On Friday afternoon, Loretta assigned him one final load. The mine needed the trailer cleared before maintenance began, and the transfer yard had agreed to remain open. Curtis considered refusing. Rain had returned and darkness would reach the mountain before he did. Then he thought about the extra hours on his paycheck. Beth's car needed brakes. Noah needed new glasses. He accepted the load. By the time Curtis reached Route 60, night had settled over the valleys. Rain covered the windshield. The trailer pushed against the truck on every descent. He passed the abandoned service station. Its plywood windows reflected his headlights. The radio clicked. Channel 7 appeared on the display. At first, Curtis heard only an engine. It was running at high speed with the uneven roar of a loaded truck descending too fast. Then the man spoke. "Westbound coal hauler coming off Laurel Grade. No air, clear the bridge." Curtis lifted his foot from the accelerator. "Which bridge?" The voice answered at once. "Red Iron Bridge below Miller's." There was no red iron bridge on the modern highway. The current bridge was concrete and stood nearly a mile north of the old alignment. Curtis looked at his paper map on the passenger seat. The abandoned road met the modern highway just before the concrete bridge. The radio carried a heavy mechanical clatter. Beneath it, another driver was pressing an air horn in long bursts. Curtis heard the same horn outside. It came from below the highway. He lowered his window. Rain entered the cab and struck his left arm. The horn sounded again. It rose through the trees from the abandoned grade. Curtis slowed. The trailer moved against the fifth wheel with a deep metal thump. "Truck 14, why are you stopping?" Loretta asked over Channel 1. Curtis did not answer. His display still showed 7. Through the trees below, 2 yellow lights appeared. They moved along the old road. Branches crossed in front of them, but the lights did not flicker. They traveled at the height of a truck cab and climbed toward the modern highway. The engine grew louder. Metal struck metal in rapid blows. The air horn continued without pause. Curtis set both hands on the wheel and pressed the brakes. The truck stopped before the place where the abandoned grade joined Route 60. His trailer remained across part of the lane. The yellow lights reached the trees beside him. The radio voice shouted one word: "Hold." Curtis held the brake pedal down. The sound crossed the highway in front of his hood. An engine passed close enough to shake the mirrors. Wind struck the cab. Black fragments scattered across the windshield and roof, but no truck entered his headlights. The yellow lights continued toward the ravine on the far side. They dropped below the guardrail and vanished among the trees. The horn stopped. Loose material rolled down Curtis's windshield. It was coal. The pieces were wet, sharp, and small enough to fit beneath a fingernail. The radio hissed. Then the man said, "Road is clear, Curtis." Channel 7 went silent. Curtis remained stopped until Loretta's voice returned through the speaker. A car waited behind his trailer, its driver flashing the headlights. He moved forward. At the transfer yard, Curtis found shallow dents across the hood and cab roof. The fresh coal fragments were different from his load. His trailer carried dull gray stone from a newer seam. The pieces on the hood were deep black and left oily marks between his fingers. Curtis placed 3 of them in an envelope. He never sent them anywhere. He stopped driving coal trucks the following spring. Beth believed his knees had finally persuaded him. Wes did not ask. Old roads do not disappear when the highway department moves the pavement. They remain beneath weeds, behind guardrails, and inside the names older drivers still use. Curtis now keeps Channel 7 locked out, and if any radio returns to it by itself, he parks, sets both brakes, and waits until the voice has finished giving directions. Rebecca Sloan never unpacked completely in a motel. She placed her toothbrush beside the sink, hung one blouse in the bathroom, and left everything else inside her suitcase. Shoes stayed near the door with their toes pointed outward. Her car keys went into the left shoe. The arrangement had begun as convenience. After 8 years of traveling for work, it had become something she could not sleep without doing. Rebecca audited convenience stores for a regional fuel company. She counted cigarettes, compared delivery records, photographed pump displays, and asked managers to explain missing money without making them feel accused. Most weeks kept her away from home for 3 nights. She knew which motel chains had quiet heating units and which ones washed their bedspreads. She carried her own tea bags because motel coffee always tasted faintly of cardboard. She also mailed a postcard to her father from every county she visited. He kept them in a shoebox beside his recliner. On Sunday afternoons, he called to complain when she had not written enough. That Thursday, Rebecca finished an audit near Gauley Bridge, shortly after 6. Rain had been falling since noon. Water ran down the parking lot and collected around her tires. Her next appointment was east of Raynell the following morning. She expected to make the drive before dark, but a highway worker stopped traffic near the mountain. A section of rock had fallen across one lane. The road would remain closed for several hours. Rebecca searched for a motel on her phone. The nearest vacancy was less than a mile behind her. The Mountain Laurel Motor Court stood below Route 60 on a narrow strip of land between the highway and the slope. It had 12 rooms arranged around a cracked parking lot. The office occupied one end. The last room faced the mountain directly. Only 2 cars were parked outside. Rebecca entered the office beneath a brass bell that rang when the door opened. The room smelled of furniture polish and boiled cabbage. A thin man sat behind the counter reading a newspaper. He was in his late 60s and wore a white shirt buttoned at the wrists. One night, he asked, "If the road opens." "It will not open tonight." He introduced himself as Franklin Vale. His family had owned the motel since the late 1970s. A framed photograph behind him showed the property when its doors had been painted yellow and every parking space was full. Franklin gave Rebecca the key to room 6. It was attached to a wooden tag large enough to prevent anyone from carrying it away by accident. "The ice machine is beside the office," he said. "Do not use the one at the far end." "Is it broken?" Franklin folded his newspaper. It starts by itself. Rebecca waited for him to smile. He did not. Room 6 was clean but old. The curtains were brown. The carpet had been repaired near the bed with a square of darker material. A landscape print hung above the television, showing a mountain lake that did not resemble West Virginia. Rebecca placed her shoes beside the door and put her keys inside the left one. She called her father while heating water in the microwave. "Where are you tonight?" he asked. "Facing a mountain. That narrows it down." He had been working on a crossword puzzle and needed a 6-letter word for a narrow opening between hills. Rebecca gave him 3 possibilities. He rejected all of them. They spoke until the microwave beeped. After the call, Rebecca reviewed photographs from the day's audit. Rain struck the metal gutter outside. Water dripped from one loose joint at regular intervals. The motel had no restaurant, so she ate peanut butter crackers and an apple from her travel bag. She watched the local news with the volume low. Shortly before 10, she heard a child laughing. The sound came from across the parking lot. Rebecca muted the television. A woman spoke next. Her words were too soft to understand. Then a spoon struck the side of a ceramic bowl 3 times. The sounds came from room 12 at the far end of the motel. Its curtains were closed. No vehicle was parked outside, but Rebecca assumed the family had arrived in one of the cars near the office. The child laughed again. A man coughed. A chair scraped across the floor. Rebecca turned the television volume back up. At 11, she prepared for bed. The conversation in room 12 continued beneath the rain. The family sounded as though they were eating a late dinner. Plates moved. A cabinet door closed. The child recited the alphabet until the woman corrected the order of 2 letters. Rebecca switched off the lamp. The voices stopped at the same moment. She lay still. Across the parking lot, a metal lock moved. A door opened less than an inch, then closed again. Rebecca pulled the blanket to her shoulders and listened until the rain covered everything. She woke at 7. The road remained closed, and her morning appointment had been postponed. Rebecca dressed and walked to the office for coffee. On the way, she glanced at room 12. A heavy chain passed through its door handle and an iron bracket fixed to the wall. The chain was secured with a brass padlock. Dust covered the window. A dead moth rested between the curtain and the glass. Franklin was pouring water into a coffee maker when Rebecca entered the office. "Is there another way into room 12?" she asked. His hand stopped above the machine. "No, I heard a family in there last night. You heard the television. My television was off." Franklin poured the water. Some missed the opening and spread across the counter. "That room is not rented." He wiped the spill with a folded towel. Rebecca took her coffee outside. As she crossed the parking lot, she noticed 4 damp marks on the pavement in front of room 12. They were shaped like bare feet. 2 were large. 2 belonged to a child. The marks ended several feet from the door. By noon, the road crew had opened 1 lane, but Rebecca's appointment had been moved to the following day. The next available motel east of the closure was full of stranded drivers. Franklin offered room 6 for another night at half price. Rebecca accepted. She spent the afternoon working from a diner near the highway. When she returned after dark, a paper grocery bag stood outside room 12. A stack of clean towels rested beside it. Franklin crossed the parking lot while Rebecca was unloading her laptop. He carried a metal pitcher and did not look toward her at room 12. He placed the pitcher beside the grocery bag. Then he unlocked the chain. Rebecca remained behind her open car door. Franklin knocked 4 times, 3 quick taps, 1 slow. The door opened inward. Warm yellow light fell across the pavement. Rebecca heard a child move inside. Franklin passed the food and towels through the opening. For a moment, Rebecca saw part of the room. A woman sat at a table with her back straight and both hands in her lap. A young boy stood beside her. He wore a striped shirt that was too large for him. Farther inside, a man faced the wall. There were no suitcases, no coats, no shoes. Franklin noticed Rebecca watching. He stepped outside and pulled the door closed. The chain returned around the handle. "You said the room was empty," Rebecca said. "I said it was not rented." "Who are they?" Franklin tested the padlock. "They are not guests." He carried the empty pitcher toward the office. Rebecca followed him halfway across the lot. "Is that door locked from the outside?" Franklin stopped. "The mountain is steep behind this place," he said. "People can get turned around." Then he went inside the office and switched off its light. Rebecca entered room 6 and locked both bolts. She placed a chair beneath the door handle. Her keys remained in her left shoe. At 9:30, the family began speaking again. The woman asked the boy to spell his name. He started with the letter D. A man corrected him. "Your name is Peter tonight." The boy repeated the new name. A spoon struck a bowl 3 times. Rebecca stood near the curtain, keeping herself behind the wall. Through a narrow gap, she could see room 12. Its window remained dark. The voices continued. The woman was called Margaret. The man was called Henry. Neither name sounded natural when they answered. Each person paused before using it. Then Franklin's voice entered the room. Places. Every chair moved at once. Silence followed. Rebecca reached for her phone. There was no signal inside the room. She moved toward the bathroom window, but it faced the slope and showed only wet earth beneath the security light. 3 quick taps, 1 slow. Rebecca did not move. Franklin spoke from outside. She looked at the clock. It was nearly 10. "I will leave in the morning. You should leave now." His shoes remained visible beneath the curtain. Water dripped from his coat onto the walkway. Behind him, room 12 opened. Rebecca heard bare feet crossing the pavement, several pairs. They stopped outside her window. No one spoke. Franklin tried the door handle once. Rebecca held her phone near the glass. A single bar appeared, then vanished. She typed a message to her father with the motel name and pressed. Send. The message remained undelivered. The child outside began reciting the alphabet. He reached the letter D and stopped. A woman whispered, "Peter." He started again. Rebecca moved to the bathroom and opened the small window. The ground outside rose sharply toward the mountain. Mud covered the slope, but a narrow drainage led toward the highway. She pushed her suitcase through first. Then she climbed onto the sink and forced herself through the window. Mud gave way beneath her shoes. She crawled upward using roots and stones. Branches caught her blouse. Behind her, Franklin knocked again. The voices outside room 6 continued, reciting the alphabet. Rebecca reached the highway and walked along the shoulder until a road crew truck found her. The driver called the county sheriff. Deputies entered the motel before midnight. Franklin was gone, so were the people from room 12. Inside, officers found 4 chairs facing a blank wall. Each chair had been bolted to the floor. A row of shoes stood beneath the window, arranged from smallest to largest. The rear wall contained a narrow door hidden behind the bathroom mirror. It opened into an old drainage passage beneath the mountain. Search teams followed the passage until a collapse blocked it. They found empty food cans, blankets, and several wooden tags from motel rooms that no longer existed. No one identified the woman, the man, or the boy. The Mountain Laurel Motor Court closed that winter. Rebecca drove past it once the following year. Plywood covered the office windows, but clean towels had been folded outside room 12. Travelers often trust locked doors because a lock seems to separate the safe side from the dangerous one. Rebecca learned that the direction of the lock matters. In every motel afterwards, she kept her shoes pointed toward the door, her keys in the left one, and a clear path to the smallest window. Noah Price kept a paper calendar above his kitchen sink. Every morning before work, he marked the weather with a small blue pencil. Rain received 1 line. Heavy rain received 2. A storm received a circle around the date. He had been doing it since his wife died. She used to say the calendar made the house look like an office. After she was gone, Noah kept marking it because the empty days seemed larger when he did not. His daughter, Kayla, lived in Charleston and called during his breakfast. She had a 5-year-old son who believed Noah could repair anything with a wrench. "Did you fix the porch light?" Kayla asked. "Not yet. You told me last week." "I am building suspense," she laughed. The sound came through the phone with kitchen noise behind it. Noah pictured his grandson pushing a chair across the floor. Before hanging up, Kayla reminded him to bring the blue blanket from her old house. She wanted it for the guest room. Noah wrote blue blanket on his wrist. He worked for the county electric service as a trouble technician. His truck carried wire, fuses, climbing gear, a portable generator, and enough tools to repair a small house or dismantle a large one. He liked the work because the problem usually had a shape: a broken insulator, a flooded junction box, a branch across a line. The danger was visible if he took his time. His partner, Darlene Moss, believed he took too much time. You look at every bolt like it owes you money, she told him. Noah had known Darlene for 11 years. She drank coffee without sugar, wore men's work gloves because the fingers were longer, and kept a small sewing kit in the truck for torn uniforms. They were assigned together after a storm damaged the lines along the Gauley River. The river ran high and brown beneath the bridges. Trees had fallen across the roads, and several homes near the bank had lost power. Their first repair was near a church with a white steeple. They worked in daylight while rain tapped the tops of their helmets. The second was at a bait shop whose roof had peeled back like paper. A man sat inside beside a battery radio and watched them replace a blown transformer. "River is taking things again," he said. Darlene looked toward the water. "What kind of things? Whatever it can carry." Noah tightened the last connection. By late afternoon, the lines were stable. The dispatcher sent them to inspect a pole near the old bridge outside Ansted. The bridge carried Route 60 over a narrow section of the river, where the banks rose steeply on both sides. They reached the access road after sunset. Noah turned off the headlights and listened before opening the door. The river made a deep, continuous sound below the trees. It was not the broad rush of water against rocks. It had a heavier rhythm, as if something large was dragging along the riverbed. Darlene heard it too. "Logs," she said. "Could be." The access road ended at a gravel shoulder above the water. A single utility pole leaned toward the river. Its crossarm had snapped, and one wire hung low over the bank. Noah switched on the truck's work lights. The beam reached the pole, the brush, and a narrow strip of water beneath the bridge. Then 3 yellow lights moved below the surface. Noah stood beside the truck with one hand on the open door. The lights were small, each about the size of a dinner plate. They appeared in a line separated by several feet. They traveled against the current through the deepest part of the river. Darlene stepped closer to the guardrail. "Boat?" No. There was no sound of an engine. The lights passed beneath the bridge and disappeared into the dark water beyond it. Noah waited for them to return. They did not. Darlene picked up the tool case. "Let us finish before the rain gets worse." They worked for 40 minutes. The river continued its low, dragging noise. Once the water struck the bank with enough force to send spray into the brush. Noah looked down. A single yellow point rested beneath the surface near the far side of the bridge. He blinked, and it was gone. They left before midnight. On the drive back, Darlene kept the window closed, even though the truck heater was blowing hot air. At the station, Noah mentioned the lights to a dispatcher named Marcy. "You saw reflections," Marcy said. "From what?" "A boat, a campfire, your own headlights." "The lights were under the water," Marcy continued typing. "My grandmother called them fairy lights." Darlene looked up from the sewing kit. "Your grandmother lived near here all her life," she said. "They show up when the river is carrying somebody." Noah waited for more. Marcy did not provide it. The next day brought clearer weather. Noah expected the river to fall, but the water remained high and dark. He marked 2 lines on his calendar and took Darlene toward another damaged pole. They approached the bridge in daylight. Nothing moved beneath it. The repair went smoothly. Noah replaced a ceramic fuse and secured the line with new clamps. Before leaving, he looked down through the rail. The river carried branches, plastic drums, and a wooden pallet. Sunlight flashed across the surface. No lights. That evening, Noah drove home and found the blue blanket in the back of the garage. He had forgotten it was still there. He folded it and placed it near the front door. At 2 in the morning, Kayla called her son had a fever. The doctor believed it was a cold, but she wanted Noah to stay on the phone while she drove to the clinic. Noah sat at the kitchen table in the dark. He listened to the tires beneath her voice. The sound changed when she crossed the bridge. "Are you there?" Kayla asked. "I am here. Tell me something." Noah described the calendar above the sink. He described the blue blanket. He did not mention the lights. The following week, the river rose again after a second storm. A line failed near the eastern bank. Noah and Darlene were sent out after sunset. The dispatcher warned them that the access road might be soft. At the bridge, the rain had stopped, but drops continued falling from the trees. The river moved below them with a thick, muffled force. Noah heard a faint knocking. It came from beneath the bridge. 3 taps. A pause. 3 taps. Darlene raised her flashlight. "Is someone down there?" The knocking stopped. Noah set out the cones and opened the tool compartment. While he worked, Darlene stood near the rail watching the water. "Do not look for them," she said. Noah glanced at her. "Who? My father saw them once." He counted 4. 4 what? She kept her eyes on the river lights. A yellow glow appeared under the bridge. Then another. Then another. They moved in a slow curve beneath the surface, following the deepest channel. A fourth light rose behind them, weaker than the rest, as if covered by mud. Noah stopped turning the wrench. The lights changed direction. They moved toward the bank. Darlene stepped away from the rail. The 4 points advanced beneath the water, maintaining the same distance from each other. They reached the shallows and stopped below the utility truck. Noah could see them through the muddy water. They were not reflections. Each one had a dull center and a narrow rim of brightness. They lit the stones around them. The truck engine was off, but the dashboard remained dark. A sound came from the rear compartment. The metal latch lifted. Darlene turned. The latch dropped back into place. Noah reached for the radio. "Dispatch, we are at the bridge, need another unit." Only static answered. He tried channel 7 on the service radio. The display had no channel labels, only a small number in the corner. The speaker came alive. A woman whispered, "Do not cross." Noah looked at Darlene. The voice continued. "Water is under the road." The bridge stood several yards ahead. Its concrete deck appeared solid beneath the work lights. Darlene walked toward the first cone. No. He heard water beneath her boots. The road surface had begun to tremble. A seam opened near the shoulder. Mud pushed upward through the crack and spilled across the gravel. The river had risen beneath the access road and was lifting the ground from below. Darlene ran back to the truck. The yellow lights remained beneath them. Noah climbed into the cab and started the engine. The rear tires spun once before catching. Mud struck the wheel wells. He reversed toward the highway. The truck tilted as the shoulder dropped. The front right tire rolled into the soft edge and sank halfway to the rim. Darlene grabbed the passenger door. "Go," Noah shifted into low gear. The engine strained. The steering wheel pulled hard to the right. Below the truck, the 4 lights moved together. They passed from the front axle to the rear. Their glow shone through the muddy water under the frame. The rear compartment latch lifted again. This time, the door opened 2 inches. Noah pressed the accelerator. The truck climbed out of the shoulder. Gravel struck the underside. Darlene slammed the rear door shut from inside the cab. The radio voice spoke once more. "Not that way." Noah did not stop. He drove onto Route 60 and continued west, leaving the bridge behind. The river followed beneath the trees. Yellow light appeared between the trunks, keeping pace with the truck. Darlene watched it through the passenger window. "It is under us," she said. Noah kept both hands on the wheel. The lights traveled beside the road for nearly a mile. They remained below the surface of the river, even when the river disappeared into a gorge. At the next bridge, they stopped. Noah crossed without looking down. At the station, Marcy called the county road crew. They found the access road damaged, with a section of gravel washed into the river. The utility pole had fallen before Noah reached it. No one found lights. Darlene did not return to field work. She transferred to dispatch and refused assignments near the river after dark. Noah continued repairing lines for another 6 years. He avoided bridges whenever another route was available, even if the detour took an hour. He kept the portable lantern from his truck in the kitchen beside the calendar. The blue pencil remained on the counter. Whenever rain began after sunset, Noah closed every curtain in the house. Then he stood in the kitchen and listened to the pipes, the refrigerator, and the water moving somewhere beyond the walls. Rivers remember the shape of everything they carry, even when the surface gives no sign. Noah learned that a light beneath dark water does not need to show its source to be seen. After every storm, he still marks 2 lines on the calendar, closes the curtains before nightfall, and places the lantern on the table with its beam facing away from the windows. Evelyn Webb kept a small alarm clock in the kitchen, even though her phone had 3 different alarms. The clock belonged to her mother. Its red second hand moved too fast, then slowed, then jumped forward again. Evelyn had learned to trust it anyway. She woke at 5 each morning, fed the dog, and packed her lunch before turning on the county radio. Her son Mason slept in the room above the garage during his first year at community college. He worked evenings at a tire shop and came home smelling of rubber. Evelyn left his breakfast inside the oven so he could find it without waking her. On duty, she carried peppermint gum in the breast pocket of her uniform. She chewed one piece whenever a call required her to drive alone through the mountain roads. The habit had started after a winter search for a lost child. She had found the child within an hour, but the gum had kept her mouth from going dry. That Tuesday began with a broken fence at a cattle farm and a dispute between two brothers over a chainsaw. Evelyn handled both before lunch. At 2 in the afternoon, the dispatcher sent her to the county newspaper office. A delivery driver had failed to return. His name was Jonah Reed. He was 58 and had delivered the morning paper along Route 60 for 16 years. His wife had called after he missed breakfast. He had also missed the first 3 stops on his afternoon route. Evelyn knew Jonah. He came into the sheriff's office every other Friday to complain about the pothole near the old quarry. He wore a canvas jacket in every season and carried a mechanical pencil behind his ear. She found his wife Nadine standing beside the newspaper office with both hands wrapped around a paper cup. His truck was found near the mountain, Nadine said. Was it locked? No. Was anything missing? Nadine shook her head. Jonah's delivery van had been located near the eastern approach to Route 60. The driver's door was open. The keys remained in the ignition. Bundles of newspapers filled the rear compartment tied with blue string. One shoe lay beside the van. The other was still on Jonah's foot. Evelyn checked the ground. Rain had fallen earlier, but the shoulder was firm enough to hold marks. Jonah's boot prints moved away from the van and stopped near a patch of flattened grass. No tracks continued toward the road. Deputy Caleb Morris arrived with 2 volunteers from the fire department. He was 26, broad-shouldered, and still wore a wedding ring from a marriage that had ended before his first year on the job. Caleb opened the van's rear doors. The papers were dry. Jonah had not begun the afternoon route. Evelyn found his route log beneath the driver's seat. The pages were covered with neat pencil marks. Jonah recorded the time at each stop, the number of papers delivered, and the odometer reading. The last entry showed mile marker 212. The next line showed mile marker 214. Between them, Jonah had written, 1 mile unaccounted for. Evelyn turned the page. The same note appeared on the previous 6 days. 1 mile unaccounted for. She looked at Caleb. Has he been writing this every day? Nadine took the notebook from Evelyn. Her face changed when she saw the entries. He did not mention it. Did he ever talk about the road? He said his odometer was wrong. The search began before sunset. A deputy closed the nearest access road while volunteers walked the shoulder in both directions. Evelyn drove slowly between mile markers 212 and 214. The distance measured just under 2 miles by her vehicle. The pavement was wet. A narrow creek ran beneath the guardrail. On the uphill side, laurel bushes crowded the trees. Nothing appeared out of place. At mile marker 213, Evelyn stopped and stepped from her cruiser. Rainwater moved through the ditch with a faint clicking sound. A plastic newspaper sleeve clung to a branch below the road. Caleb climbed down and retrieved it. Inside was a paper from the previous morning. The address label had been torn away. They searched the slope until dark. The forest floor was thick with leaves and stone. A person could stand 10 feet from the road and vanish behind the brush. At 8, Sheriff Boone ordered them to stop for the night. Evelyn returned to the office and spread Jonah's route log across her desk. The extra mile appeared in the same place every day, 212 to 214. She called the highway department. An engineer named Paul Treadwell checked the current road plans. There was an older alignment, he said. Before the widening project. How old? 40s, maybe earlier. Most of it is gone. Does it pass between those markers? It used to. Paul emailed a map. The old road left the current pavement near marker 212, dropped toward the creek, and rejoined the highway beyond marker 214. A blue line had been drawn through the section marked abandoned. Evelyn drove back the next morning with Caleb. They parked at marker 212 and entered the woods. The old road was easy to find at first. Asphalt showed beneath the leaves. A rusted guardrail ran along the creek. Weeds grew through cracks shaped like long black fingers. The road continued for several hundred yards before ending at a wall of earth. Caleb scraped away the leaves with his boot. Could be buried by the slide. Evelyn looked at the map. The old alignment should have crossed the slope and returned to Route 60. Instead, the ground rose steeply where the road ended. A sound came from beyond the dirt wall. Paper moved in the brush. Evelyn and Caleb stood still. The sound came again, a soft rubbing like pages turning in a room with no wind. Caleb raised his flashlight. At the top of the slope, a newspaper slid from beneath a tree. It landed with the front page facing upward. The date was that morning. Evelyn climbed toward it. The paper was warm from the sun, though the sky remained gray. Its edges were dry. The headline concerned a county meeting that had not yet happened. Caleb took out his phone. "No signal," he said. Evelyn tried the radio. Static answered on every channel. They returned to the cruiser. The odometer showed 1 additional mile since they had parked. Caleb checked the distance. "We walked maybe half a mile." Evelyn did not reply. At the sheriff's office, they compared the newspaper with the printer's records. The paper had been printed at 4:30 that morning. The front page story had been written after 7. Nadine identified Jonah's handwriting in the route log. She also found a loose page in his kitchen desk. On it, he had drawn the same section of road from memory. The current highway was marked in black. The abandoned alignment was marked in blue. Along the blue line, Jonah had written the names of 6 people. None appeared in county missing person records. Nadine knew 3 of them as former neighbors. One had moved to Ohio. One had died in a nursing home. The others had disappeared from town years earlier without anyone filing a report. "Why would Jonah write their names?" Evelyn asked. Nadine folded the page. He kept track of things that did not make sense. That afternoon, Sheriff Boone assigned a state search team. Dogs followed Jonah's scent from the van to marker 212, then lost it near the guardrail. They did not follow the old road. The road crew inspected the area and found no open passage through the slope. A bulldozer had covered the old alignment decades earlier, yet Jonah's van had traveled farther than the current road allowed. Evelyn returned to the mountain alone after midnight. She carried a flashlight, a paper map, and 2 pieces of peppermint gum. Her mother's alarm clock sat on the cruiser dashboard because Evelyn had taken it from the kitchen without thinking. At marker 212, she turned off the headlights. The road became a narrow strip of pale pavement between the trees. Rain ticked against the roof. Somewhere below, the creek struck a stone, stopped, then struck it again. Evelyn started the trip recorder. She passed marker 213. The dashboard clock skipped forward 1 minute. The odometer increased by 1 mile. Evelyn pressed the brakes. The cruiser stopped beside a gravel turnout that did not appear on the map. A mailbox stood there, its metal door open. Inside was a bundle of newspapers tied with blue string. The top paper carried the same future headline she had found in the woods. A voice came through the radio. "Deputy Webb." Evelyn reached for the microphone. The voice was Jonah's. "Do not leave the papers." She looked toward the turnout. Beyond the mailbox, the old road continued through the trees. A porch light glowed far downhill. No house appeared on the map. The radio hissed. Then a second voice spoke. A woman. Then a child. They were reading names, the same names from Jonah's loose page. Evelyn reversed the cruiser. The tires spun on wet gravel. The mailbox rocked in the headlights. At the edge of the turnout, a figure stepped onto the old road. It wore a canvas jacket. Evelyn saw one pale hand lift toward the windshield. She drove forward. The figure remained beside the road. The porch light went out. The radio fell silent. Evelyn reached the current highway and did not stop until she saw the lights of a gas station near town. Search crews returned at first light. The turnout was gone. No mailbox stood beside the road. The newspaper bundle was not in the cruiser. Jonah Reed was never found. The sheriff's office kept his route log in evidence. The final page continued to show an extra mile between markers 212 and 214. Evelyn later transferred to courthouse duty. She still drove the mountain when required, but she no longer trusted distances listed on signs. A mile can vanish from a map without leaving an empty space. It can remain in a tire track, a pencil mark, or the gap between 2 places where a person was last seen. Evelyn now checks her odometer at every marker, and whenever it gains a mile too quickly, she pulls over, removes 1 piece of peppermint gum, and waits for the road to become the same length again. Mason Rudd kept a red knit cap on the dashboard of his tow truck. He wore it only when the temperature dropped below freezing, but he carried it through every season. His daughter had bought it at a gas station when she was 8. The stitching had come loose near the folded edge, and a white thread stuck out like a tiny flag. Mason owned a roadside recovery service near Ansted. His garage held one heavy wrecker, 2 flatbeds, and a collection of tools he refused to lend. He began each shift by walking beneath the wrecker with a flashlight. He checked the hydraulic lines, the winch cable, the wheel lifts, and the locking pins. He did this even when the truck had been parked all day. His younger brother, Jerry, called the habit excessive. "If you ever find a bear under there, you are keeping it," Jerry said. Mason carried a thermos of coffee into the cab. "Bears do not fit. Neither does your back." Mason had worked roadside recovery for 22 years. His back had learned the shape of the driver's seat. His hands smelled of grease even after washing. When he slept, he sometimes woke, with his fingers curled around an invisible steering wheel. His daughter, Paige, lived in Morgantown and called before her evening shift at a bookstore. She was 24 and had started collecting old postcards from towns along Route 60. "Found one from the old bridge," she said. "Send it to me. You will put it on the refrigerator and forget it is there. That is where postcards live." He heard a bus pass behind her. "Drive safe," she said. "You too." Mason worked alone after 9 at night. He preferred it. A second person meant another set of instructions, another light in the wrong place, another voice asking how much longer. The call came at 11:42 on a Tuesday. A deputy had found an abandoned sedan below Route 60 near a sharp downhill curve. The car had left the pavement and struck a group of trees. No driver was inside. The deputy wanted the vehicle removed before morning traffic increased. Mason took the call from the dispatcher, a woman named Becca Lane. She had worked the county radio for 3 years and knew Mason's truck by its engine noise. "Bring the long cable," she said. "Why? The sedan is farther down than it looks." Mason pulled on his jacket and reached for the red cap. He left it on the dashboard. Rain had stopped, but water fell from the trees in slow drops. The road shone beneath his headlights. His wrecker climbed through the bends with the engine holding steady. At the crash site, a deputy stood beside the guardrail with a flashlight. He pointed over the edge. The sedan rested nose down between 2 trees. Its headlights were off. One door hung open. Mason parked on the shoulder and set the brake. Before stepping out, he heard a dull knock beneath the truck. He looked toward the deputy. "You hear that?" The deputy shook his head. Mason walked around the wrecker with the flashlight. The road was empty. Water dripped from the undercarriage. The tires rested on solid pavement. Another knock came from behind the rear axle. Mason crouched and directed the beam beneath the truck. The light reached the driveshaft, the suspension, and the wet gravel. Nothing moved. He stood. The deputy asked if the truck was safe to use. Mason looked once more beneath the wrecker. Safe enough. The sedan had no license plate. Its windshield was cracked across the passenger side, but the interior contained no blood, no wallet, and no keys. Mason climbed down the slope and attached the cable. The trees creaked whenever the wind moved through them. He pulled the vehicle free in slow increments. The cable tightened. The sedan rose over the rocks. Its open door swung back and forth without closing. When the car reached the road, Mason heard breathing beneath the wrecker. It was not loud. It came in 2 short pulls, followed by a pause. He turned off the winch. The deputy stood beside the sedan. "What now?" Mason lowered the flashlight toward the ground. The breathing continued. It came from the opposite side of the truck. Mason walked around the front bumper. The sound stopped. He returned to the rear. The breathing began again beneath the center of the wrecker. Mason placed one hand on the metal frame. The steel was cold from the rain. The deputy called his name. Mason stepped away and finished securing the sedan. At the garage, he unloaded the car and locked the gate. Before leaving, he walked beneath the wrecker again. The flashlight beam passed over wet axles and black hoses. A line of mud marked the center of the frame. It looked like a hand had dragged through it, leaving 4 long streaks. Mason wiped the mark away with a rag. At home, he hung his keys on the hook beside the kitchen door. Paige's postcard from the old bridge had arrived. It showed a narrow span over dark water with mountains rising behind it. Mason placed the postcard on the refrigerator. Then he heard breathing beneath the porch. He stood in the kitchen with one hand on the counter. The sound came through the floorboards. 2 short pulls, a pause. He opened the front door. The porch was empty. Rainwater gathered along the steps. The yard sloped toward a line of trees. Mason took the red cap from the wrecker the next morning and put it on his own head for the first time in years. Jerry arrived at the garage before lunch. He found Mason beneath the truck with a mirror on a telescoping handle. Loose a bolt checking the frame. You check the frame every day. Not like this, Mason told him about the breathing. Jerry stood beside the tire and looked at the road. Our father heard something under the old wrecker, he said. When, before you bought this one? What did he do, sold the truck? Jerry returned to the office and began sorting invoices. Mason stayed under the wrecker. That night, Becca called at 10:30. A pickup had broken down near the same curve. The driver had no cell signal and was waiting beside the vehicle. Mason considered sending a flatbed instead. Then he remembered the sedan from the night before. He took the wrecker. The road was dry. The moon showed between the ridges. At the curve, he heard the breathing before he reached the disabled pickup. It came from beneath his own truck. Mason kept driving. The pickup stood on the shoulder with its hood raised. A man in a yellow jacket waited beside it. He had already placed a warning triangle behind the vehicle. Mason parked ahead of him. Battery, Mason asked. Starter Mason opened the toolbox. Beneath the wrecker, breathing moved from the rear axle toward the front. The sound was clearer now. The man in the yellow jacket looked beneath the truck. You got somebody under there? Mason closed the toolbox. No, the man laughed once, then stopped when Mason did not. Mason connected the booster cables. The pickup engine turned slowly and started. During the repair, the breathing continued. It traveled beneath the wrecker whenever Mason moved. When he crouched near the passenger side, the sound came from the driver's side. When he crossed behind the truck, it came from beneath the cab. The man in the yellow jacket thanked him and drove away. Mason waited until the taillights disappeared. He aimed the flashlight beneath the wrecker. A dark shape showed between the rear tires. Mason took one step closer. The shape moved toward the front. He dropped the light. The beam rolled across the pavement, shining beneath the truck in a slow circle. The breathing stopped. Mason retrieved the flashlight and climbed into the cab. He shut the doors, locked them, and drove home without checking the road behind him. The following week, no calls came from the curve. Mason began sleeping at the garage. He told Paige the house needed plumbing work. She sent him a postcard showing a covered bridge. He pinned it beside the first one. The garage had a concrete floor and no basement. At night, every sound carried through the building. Rain tapped the metal roof. The refrigerator motor started and stopped. The wrecker settled on its springs. Mason kept the floodlights on until dawn. On Friday, a county vehicle slid off Route 60 during a freezing rain. Mason was the only operator available. He drove slowly. Ice formed along the windshield edges. The disabled vehicle rested near an old cemetery, its rear wheels hanging over a ditch. Mason positioned the wrecker and lowered the wheel lift. The breathing started beneath the truck. He stopped working. The sound came from directly below the driver's door. Mason took the mirror from the toolbox. He lay flat on the pavement and pushed the mirror beneath the truck. The reflection showed the underside, the tires, and a strip of gray sky. At the edge of the mirror, something occupied the space between the axles. It was shaped like a person lying on its back. Mason could see the outline of shoulders and knees. The face remained outside the reflection, hidden above the mirror's frame. He moved the mirror 6 inches. The shape moved 6 inches too. Mason pulled it back. The breathing stopped. He sat up. Water ran from his sleeves. The county driver stood beside the disabled vehicle and watched him. Everything all right? Mason looked beneath the wrecker without the mirror. There was only ice and black pavement. He finished the recovery. The county vehicle rolled onto the road. Mason followed it to the nearest maintenance yard. On the way back, the red cap slid from the dashboard to the floor. Mason did not pick it up. At the garage, he turned off the engine and remained in the cab. The wrecker's cooling metal clicked beneath him. Then the passenger door handle lifted. Mason watched it rise. The door opened 1 inch. Cold air entered the cab. A voice spoke from beneath the truck. Mason. He knew the voice. It belonged to his father, who had been dead for 8 years. Mason did not answer. The breathing moved toward the rear of the wrecker. A chain dragged across concrete. The sound passed beneath the garage door and continued into the alley. Mason stayed in the cab until morning. He sold the wrecker 2 months later. The buyer arrived with a mechanic, inspected the hydraulic system, and drove the truck away without noticing anything unusual. Mason kept the red cap. He also kept the mirror. He no longer worked roadside after dark, but he still drove past the old curve on his way into town. Each time he slowed before the guardrail and looked beneath every vehicle parked on the shoulder. A tow truck is built to lift what cannot move, but some burdens remain attached after the wheels leave the ground. Mason learned to listen beneath the machinery before trusting the road above it. Now he leaves a flashlight burning under the empty wrecker bay, and if the beam ever shifts across the concrete by itself, he shuts the garage door and waits outside until sunrise. Allison Webb kept her case notes in a blue spiral notebook with a torn cover. She wrote everything by hand before entering it into the county system. Names, medications, broken steps, unpaid bills, the brand of cereal someone preferred. Her supervisor said the notebook was unnecessary. Allison continued using it. On Thursday morning, she wrote down 3 things before leaving home: pick up dry cleaning, call mom, buy dog food. The list remained on the kitchen counter beside an empty cereal bowl. Her mother had called twice during the night about a leaking faucet. Allison promised to visit after work. She worked for the county's Adult Services Department. Most assignments involved welfare checks, missed meals, unpaid utility bills, or neighbors who had seen an elderly person standing outside too long. That morning, a Meals on Wheels driver reported that Harold Vance had not answered his door for 4 days. Harold was 82. He lived at the end of an old mining road outside Kincaid, where the county pavement gave way to gravel and the houses became farther apart. The dispatcher handed Allison a thin folder. His nephew called last month, she said. Harold was getting forgetful. Any medical diagnosis? Nothing in the file. Anyone nearby? One woman at the church, June Barlow. She said Harold should have moved years ago. Allison placed the folder on the passenger seat of her county vehicle. She carried a flashlight, a first aid kit, bottled water, and the blue notebook. Kincaid had once been a company town. The mine had closed decades earlier, but the road still followed the old rail grade through the hills. Houses stood at uneven angles. Some had porches without stairs. Others had roofs held down by old tires. Allison passed a church with boarded windows, a general store converted into a garage, and a row of mailboxes with names painted over. Her cell phone lost service before the road narrowed. The gravel continued uphill. Rain had softened the edges, and branches brushed the vehicle's mirrors. At the top, the road ended in a circle of packed dirt. One house stood beyond it. The porch leaned toward the valley. A porch light burned despite the daylight. Behind the house, the mountain rose almost vertically, covered in bare trees and patches of wet stone. Allison turned off the engine and listened. Water dripped from the roof. A generator ran somewhere behind the house. No dog barked. No television played. The only other sound was a loose length of metal tapping against the porch railing. She approached the front door. "Mr. Vance," a man answered from inside. "Who is it?" "My name is Allison Webb. I am with County Adult Services." The lock turned. The man who opened the door was around 60. He wore a gray cardigan and slippers. His hair was white, but his face had a firm, almost polished appearance. "Harold Vance," he said. Allison checked the photograph in the folder. The man at the door did not resemble it. The photograph showed an older person with a broad nose, deep folds around the mouth, and a left eye that drooped slightly. The man in front of her had narrow features and a straight left eyelid. "I need to see your identification," Allison said. He reached into his cardigan and removed a driver's license. The name was Harold Vance. The photograph was too faded to read clearly. "I have been ill," he said. His voice was calm. He opened the door wider. The house smelled of boiled potatoes and damp wood. A kitchen table stood beneath a bare light bulb. 2 plates had been set out, though only one chair showed signs of use. Allison stepped inside. At the end of the hallway, a wooden door had been covered with 3 new boards. The nails were bright and clean. A small metal speaker had been mounted beside the frame. She heard a faint electrical hum. "What room is that?" she asked. "Storage. Why the intercom?" "Old system. It does not work." A voice came through the speaker. "Harold." The man at the door turned his head. The voice sounded elderly and weak. It came from behind the boarded door. Allison opened her notebook. "Who is in there?" "No one." The voice spoke again. "Please. I need water." The man crossed the hallway and switched off the speaker. The hum stopped. He returned to the kitchen. "My brother has dementia," he said. "He gets confused and talks to himself." "Your brother, Harold." Allison looked at the license in his hand. The man placed it on the table. "He was my uncle," he said. The sentence sat between them. Allison wrote the word uncle in her notebook. The man noticed. "You are wasting time. I need to complete the welfare check. He is being cared for." "By whom?" The man looked toward the boarded door. "By me." Allison asked to speak with Harold directly. The man refused. He said Harold was sleeping. He said the voice had come from a recording. He said the house had belonged to his mother, and the intercom had been installed when the mine still operated. None of the explanations arrived in the same order. Allison asked about medication. The man named 2 bottles on a shelf, but the labels belonged to blood pressure prescriptions for different patients. One bottle had expired 6 years earlier. She asked when Harold had last seen a doctor. The man said Monday. The folder showed no appointment. A light knock sounded from behind the boards. The man's shoulders tightened. Allison walked toward the hallway. "Do not open that door," he said. "Why? Because he will hurt you." The voice behind the boards whispered Allison's name. She stopped. She had not given it to anyone except the man at the front door. "Mrs. Webb," the voice said. "He is not Harold." The man moved between her and the hallway. "Your visit is finished." Allison took 1 step backward. "Where is your phone?" He did not answer. She noticed a black cord running from the intercom speaker into the wall. It disappeared beneath the baseboard and continued toward the kitchen. The house had a second phone line. A smell of fresh sawdust came from the boarded door. Allison wrote down the time. The man watched her pen. "Leave the notebook." She closed it. "I am going to call my supervisor. There is no service here. I can use your landline." The man smiled without showing his teeth. The line was cut. A vehicle moved outside. Allison looked through the kitchen window. A dark pickup sat behind her county vehicle. She had not seen it arrive. The man went to the front door and locked it. Allison placed her medical bag on the table. Her hands were steady, but she noticed that the zipper pull had started tapping against the metal clasp. Behind the boards, Harold began to cough. The man walked to the hallway. You should not have heard him. Allison opened her medical bag and removed the blood pressure cuff. The man looked at it, then at her. "What are you doing?" "Checking whether he needs medical attention." "He does not." Harold spoke through the speaker. "Please do not let him take me outside." The man reached for the intercom. Allison stepped between them. The man's hand stopped inches from her shoulder. For the first time, she saw the skin around his fingernails. It was stained dark as if he had been digging in wet earth. A truck passed on the road below. Its engine climbed, then faded. The house became quiet. The man moved toward the kitchen counter. A hammer lay beside the sink. Allison picked up the first aid kit and held it against her chest. "Move away from the counter," she said. He looked at the hammer. Then he looked at her. The generator outside stopped. The refrigerator clicked off. The porch light disappeared. The intercom lost its hum. Darkness settled through the house. Allison heard the man take 2 steps. She moved toward the kitchen window. His hand caught the back of her jacket. The fabric tightened against her throat. Allison drove her elbow backward and felt it strike bone. The man released her. She lifted the window latch. It stuck halfway. She struck it with the metal edge of the first aid kit. The glass opened. Cold rain entered. Allison climbed through and dropped onto the mud behind the house. Her shoes sank to the ankles. The mountain rose above her, close enough to hear water moving through the leaves. The back of the house had no porch. A narrow concrete stairwell descended beneath the kitchen. At the bottom, she found a metal door. The generator was stored inside a small shed beside it. Its fuel line ran through the wall. Allison crouched beside the door and listened. A chair scraped on the other side. Then a voice spoke. "Do not leave me." The voice was close. Allison pulled the door. It opened inward. A narrow passage ran beneath the house. A bare bulb hung from the ceiling, powered by a separate battery. The walls were lined with shelves, holding canned food, folded towels, and old motel-style room keys. At the end of the passage, another door had been bolted from the outside. Allison removed the first aid kit from her shoulder and struck the bolt. It took 3 blows to loosen. The door opened. An elderly man sat on a mattress against the wall. His hands rested in his lap. A blanket covered his legs. His left eye drooped exactly as it had in the photograph. Harold Vance looked at Allison. "Are you counting?" "Yes." He nodded once. "Then write this down." She opened the blue notebook. Before he could speak, footsteps moved above them. The false Harold had found the passage. Allison helped the old man stand. He was lighter than she expected. His knees bent when he tried to walk. A second set of footsteps sounded behind the bolted door. Someone else was in the passage. Allison turned the flashlight toward the shelves. A child's shoe rested beside the room keys. Then a woman whispered from the dark. "Places." Harold gripped Allison's sleeve. "Keep going." They moved toward the stairwell. The footsteps above stopped. Rain fell through the open kitchen window. Allison pushed Harold up the stairs. He stumbled once, and she caught him beneath the arm. At the top, the man in the cardigan stood beside the kitchen table. The hammer was gone. He held a bundle of car keys. "Put him back," he said. Harold looked at him. "You have the wrong house now." A siren sounded on the road below. Allison had managed to trigger the emergency button on her radio before climbing through the window. The signal must have reached a tower once she moved into the open. The man turned toward the back door. Deputies entered from the front less than a minute later. They found him outside, running toward the trees. He disappeared before the first deputy reached the slope. Inside the house, the boarded room stood open. It contained a mattress, a chair, and a small table with 2 empty bowls. The passage beneath the house was gone. The concrete stairwell ended at a wall of packed earth. No second door, no shelves, no room keys. Harold was taken to the hospital. He could not explain how long he had been held there or who the other voices belonged to. The man at the front door was never identified. The pickup behind the house had been stolen from a county garage 2 weeks earlier. Allison returned to work after 3 months. She kept the blue notebook, but she no longer entered a client's home without leaving the front door open. She also photographed the shoes beside every bed. A house at the end of a road can seem abandoned long before its windows go dark. Allison learned that a locked door may protect the person outside it, while the person inside has no way to ask who is listening. Since Kincaid, she leaves one shoe pointed toward the exit, keeps her radio in her hand, and never ignores a voice coming through a wall. Thomas Bell measured winter by the sound of his furnace. When the blower started cleanly, he expected an easy season. When it clicked twice before turning on, he knew he would spend January climbing frozen signal towers and thawing cables with a propane torch. That October, the furnace made no sound at all. Thomas stood in the basement with one hand on the breaker panel. He held a flashlight between his teeth and listened to the pipes. The house remained quiet except for the clock above the washing machine. His wife Marion called from the kitchen. "Did you fix it? It is thinking about it. Tell it to think faster." Thomas replaced the fuse and pressed the switch. The blower started with a low shudder. Marion appeared at the basement door, wearing the red scarf she had owned since college. She had cut the fringe off one end after it became caught in a car door. "You leave tomorrow?" "Before sunrise." Thomas repaired railway signals and crossing equipment across the mountain counties. His truck carried insulated gloves, test meters, wire, replacement lamps, and a thermos of coffee strong enough to taste like burnt wood. He liked railway work because the lights spoke plainly. Red meant stop, yellow meant prepare. Green meant the line was clear. Road signs were less reliable. On Friday morning, Thomas left home before 5. He kissed Marion in the hallway and promised to call when he reached the worksite. She stood beside the kitchen window until his truck disappeared beyond the trees. His assignment involved a malfunctioning crossing signal near a freight spur outside Alderson. A storm had loosened a cable and caused the lights to flash, even when no train was approaching. Thomas spent the morning in wet leaves beside the tracks. Freight cars moved past him with a long metallic groan. He replaced the cable, tested the circuit, and watched the signal return to red, yellow, and green in the proper order. The foreman brought him lunch in a paper sack. Inside was a ham sandwich, a boiled egg, and 2 oatmeal cookies. Thomas saved 1 cookie for Marion. The repair took longer than expected. By late after snow had begun falling over the higher ridges, Thomas called home from the truck. "Roads are turning white," Marion said. "I am leaving now." Take the lower route. I will. The lower route followed Route 60 through a series of valleys and old mining towns. Thomas had driven it for years. He knew where the pavement dipped near creeks and where deer crossed before dark. Snow thickened as he traveled east. The truck heater blew warm air across his hands. The tires made a steady hiss on the wet road. Every few miles, a snowplow appeared in the opposite lane with orange lights rotating above the cab. Thomas listened to the weather report on the radio. The forecast warned of 2 inches near the river and 6 inches above the passes. At a bridge outside a town called Glen Wilton, traffic slowed. A fallen tree blocked the road ahead. A state truck had parked sideways with its lights flashing. An officer directed vehicles toward a temporary detour. Thomas lowered his window. "Where does this come out?" he asked. The officer pointed toward a narrow road climbing into the trees. "Cold Hollow. It will bring you back to the highway." Thomas had never heard of Cold Hollow. The officer walked closer. "Stay on the pavement. Do not take the old logging turn." Thomas nodded and followed the line of cars. The detour began as a paved road with faded center markings. Snow gathered along the shoulders. Houses stood far apart, each with a single porch light. The radio lost the weather report. Static filled the cab. Thomas changed stations. Music appeared for a few seconds, then vanished. He tried the emergency channel. Nothing answered. The road climbed a sign beside the pavement read Cold Hollow in black letters. Beneath it, someone had painted over another word. The older paint showed through in a pale rectangle. Thomas passed a small church, a closed gas station, and a row of houses facing the road. People stood behind the windows. They did not wave. They watched the truck move through the snow. Thomas looked in the rearview mirror. The cars from the detour had disappeared. No headlights followed him. His dashboard clock read 6:15. He expected the road to descend within a few minutes. Instead, it climbed between steep banks. Snow covered the tire tracks ahead. A weather broadcast returned on the radio. A man read the temperature and wind speed in a calm voice. Then he said, "Route 60 remains closed." The Cold Hollow Road was abandoned in 1963. Thomas turned the volume down. The voice continued beneath the static. "No traffic should be entering." Thomas stopped the truck. The heater fan rattled. Snow struck the windshield. Somewhere outside, water dripped beneath the road. He turned off the radio. Silence filled the cab. Then someone knocked on the passenger window. Thomas looked. A woman stood beside the truck. She wore a dark coat and held a small child against her hip. Snow covered both of them. The child's face rested against her shoulder. Thomas lowered the window 2 inches. "Do you need help?" The woman pointed ahead. "You missed the turn." Thomas looked at the road. "There is only one road." She shook her head. "Not anymore." The child lifted its face. Its eyes remained closed. Thomas raised the window and started the engine. The woman did not move. As the truck pulled away, she remained beside the shoulder until snow covered her boots. Thomas drove slowly. The road curved left, then right, then left again. The houses continued. At the next bend, he saw the same church. Its white steeple leaned slightly toward the road. A torn flag hung beside the door. Thomas checked the map on his phone. The screen showed no signal and no road. His navigation arrow remained fixed in one place. He passed the church again. The porch light at the first house went out, then the next, then the next. Thomas pressed the accelerator. The truck slid toward the ditch before the tires caught. A bridge appeared ahead. It was narrow and made of dark metal. Thomas stopped before it. The radio switched on by itself. The weather announcer spoke in the same calm voice. "Visibility is now less than 1/4 mile. The bridge ahead is closed." Thomas looked across the bridge. Snow moved through the headlights in long diagonal lines. On the far side, someone stood beneath a road sign. The sign was green and white. Thomas could not read it. The figure lifted one arm and pointed toward the bridge. Thomas shifted into reverse. The truck would not move. The engine remained steady. The tires turned once, then stopped. A sound came from beneath the trailer. Metal rubbing against metal. Thomas reached for the door handle. A hand appeared against the passenger window. It was pale and pressed flat against the glass from outside. The fingers moved slowly, leaving 5 clear lines through the condensation. Thomas held his breath until his chest hurt. The hand vanished. The truck lurched backward. He turned the wheel and drove away from the bridge, following a narrow lane beside the houses. The pavement ended beneath the snow, but the truck continued over packed ground. A porch door opened on his left. A man stepped out holding a lantern. Thomas recognized the jacket. It belonged to the state officer who had directed traffic at the main road. The man walked toward the truck. Thomas kept driving. The road narrowed between two stone walls. Branches struck the mirrors. The truck's headlights showed a white gate ahead. The gate stood open. Beyond it was the highway. Thomas drove through. The tires struck asphalt. Snowplows moved in both directions. Orange lights reflected across the windshield. He stopped near the original closure. The officer who had given the detour stood beside his truck. "You made it around," the officer said. Thomas stared at him. "How long was I gone?" The officer checked his watch. "About 20 minutes. Thomas looked at the dashboard clock. It read 7:43. The truck odometer showed 1 extra mile. The officer asked if he needed medical help. Thomas shook his head and drove to the nearest gas station. Inside, he washed his face and checked the passenger window. 5 pale lines remained in the condensation. He wiped them away with a paper towel. When he returned to the truck, the red scarf Marion had packed for him lay across the passenger seat. He had left it at home. Thomas called her from the station. "You sound far away," Marion said. He looked toward the road. "Did you put your scarf in my truck?" "No." He told her he would be home soon. The road reopened before midnight. Thomas never took the detour again. The State Transportation Office found no official record of Cold Hollow Road, though an older map in the county archive showed a narrow line crossing the ridge. The paper listed no bridge. The following winter, Thomas received a letter with no return address. Inside was a small black and white photograph of a church in falling snow. On the back, someone had written, "You missed the turn." Thomas burned the photograph in the kitchen sink. He did not tell Marion mountain roads can close without warning, but some detours ask for more than a change of direction. Thomas learned that a road may survive in names, windows, and old weather reports long after the pavement is gone. Every winter, when the radio announces a closure, he pulls onto the shoulder before the first detour sign and waits with the engine running until daylight.